But for Salesforce is where this group really focused on this particular attack. We see from our supply chain that more than 700 companies were probably affected by this, and that number could be much bigger because we don't have perfect visibility into this. But we know at least 700 could be kind of like the number that we are using. So this actor, once they installed those OAuth, that OAuth client token from Drift, was able to access every Drift customer that had configured that Salesforce integration, right?
Welcome to Petri Dish. In today's episode, we're diving deep into the world of security with Jaime Blasco, who's CTO and co-founder of Nudge Security. I'll be asking Jaime to unravel the recent Salesloft Drift breach and to explain why OAuth integrations are a security blind spot. Hi, Jaime. How are you
Great,
today?
thank you. Nice to see you.
Great, and you. Thanks for joining us. So for people who haven't heard of this breach and maybe even this application, can you give us a little bit of a background on Salesloft Drift and the breach that happened? I think it was already a couple of weeks ago now. And I think the group is called UNC 6395, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about that. What we know so far, and we don't know all the details yet. Like, we know that Google Mandiant is working with Drift and Salesloft to eventually publish more details about how this happened. But the public information that we have today indicates that a company called Drift that was acquired by another company called Salesloft last year got breached at the beginning of this year, something around March. Drift published details around what happened, and not many, but they believe that around March, this group, UNC 6395, that Google Mandiant, is the name that Google uses for that group. And that UNC at the beginning of the name means that it's uncategorized, meaning that it's not a particular threat actor that they know much about in terms of attribution. So it's still a cluster of activity that they're trying to understand better. So we know that that group got access to the GitHub, some GitHub repositories of Drift Salesloft in March. For a few months, they were kind of trying to get access to the environment, trying to understand the environment. And then after, they believe around July, they pivoted from those GitHub repositories into the AWS environment. And once they were in the AWS environment, they were able to steal OAuth tokens from different integrations that Drift provides. So to give you some context, Drift is an agent, an AI kind of agent that people use for, when you go to websites and you talk to the chat in the website. And obviously, in order for that agent to perform well, it needs access to some data about your customers, right? So people usually connect Drift into Salesforce, into Google, into files, into other CRMs, into some developer tools and internal APIs. So this tool may have access to significant amount of data. What we know so far is the threat actors did gain access to at least the Salesforce OAuth integration, but we also know they did that for the Google Workspace one as well. And we know that a limited number of customers were also targeted in their Google Workspace integration. But for Salesforce is where this group really focused on this particular attack. We see from our supply chain that more than 700 companies were probably affected by this, and that number could be much bigger because we don't have perfect visibility into this. But we know at least 700 could be kind of like the number that we are using. So this actor, once they installed those OAuth, that OAuth client token from Drift, was able to access every Drift customer that had configured that Salesforce integration, right? Once they did that, they were looking after credentials. And what they did was listing support cases in Salesforce from the customers of those vendors and trying to find support cases where there were some passwords or credentials that the customers have shared with those vendors. And that's a very interesting, way of doing this. We have seen this in previous breaches that affected Okta and Cloudflare, for instance, where the attackers were doing the same, trying to find those support cases where people upload network recordings, or maybe they attach passwords and like to those support tickets, which I don't recommend to anyone,
Right.
but we have seen that over and over happening.
Okay. Okay, so let's roll back a little bit. So do we know how they got access to GitHub in the first
We
place?
don't have that information today. Again, we know that Mandiant is doing an incident response, and Drift has promised more details, but we don't know how they got access. I can hypothesize in terms of how that happened, but we see those incidents all the time, and they're like specific things that happen commonly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there any point at which Drift's IT could have stopped this attack from happening?
I mean, 100% from a Drift perspective, like having visibility into GitHub, having visibility into the credentials, the AWS environment, having some sort of cloud security tooling, will have detected this activity. And, in most modern organizations, this is the case. Again, we don't know who the threat actor is. There could be very sophisticated, but based on what we have seen so far, this is likely a not super sophisticated actor. They're good, but I don't think this is like a state level actor where they use certain techniques to fly under the radar. I think from a cloud security perspective, there are ways that vendors can implement where they can see this activity, and even if it happens, being able to find it quickly and prevent the use of those credentials is the right thing to do, right? We know that breaches are going to happen. It's about how quickly you can react to them and how quickly you can prevent the credentials being stolen and being used to access your customer environments.
Okay, so these, just for people who are maybe not aware, these OAuth tokens are like keys, essentially, keys to some kind of kingdom. So are these things just floating around in GitHub for anybody to take who's got access, or what's the deal with that?
Well, hopefully they didn't have the OAuth tokens in GitHub itself, and we believe those were in AWS, and maybe hopefully they were in AWS Secrets Manager. Maybe, like we don't have many details, but regardless, once you get access to the environment, those are tokens that you can steal and then use outside of the environment. And there are technologies like OIDC where you can create trust across environments. But not all the OAuth providers support this, right? With Google and Microsoft do support this, right? So like you can configure trust between GitHub and Microsoft and GitHub and Google and make it so those tokens only work in those environments, but that doesn't work with every single SaaS application out there.
Right, okay. So if I'm right in thinking they were able to bypass multi-factor authentication on Salesforce.
Yeah. So in this case,
how does that?
Yeah,
how
in
does
this
that
case,
happen?
MFA and other controls are useless because it's a non-human identity, meaning that OAuth grant it doesn't go through regular authentication. Right. Basically, you create trust between your Salesforce instance and Drift. And from now on, you trust Drift with those credentials, and there is no continuous authentication in that sense. There are things you can do, and we can talk about that later. And for example, Okta came out and said, hey, we were affected, but we were able to contain this breach because we had implemented certain controls that only allow access to our Salesforce environment from the IP ranges that we know Salesloft is using. So since the attackers stole those OAuth tokens and then they used them from outside of the Salesloft environment, and the other reason why I think it will be more easy to detect than in other breaches is because they use Tor and they use infrastructure that is usually not commonly used to access your Salesforce instances with all tokens. If you had some basic controls around IP ranges and also some controls around detecting activity from Tor and other suspicious infrastructure, at the very least, you should have been able to detect this activity, if not block it like Okta did. So they did a pretty good job in this sense compared to previous, breaches.
Right. So essentially, once you've got that OAuth token in your hands, it's game over, really. There's all the other protections potentially can be overridden unless you've got some other conditions attached to it, like you've just described.
There are other things, and we can go into more details around timeouts, where it's session timeouts, right? Where you can, in certain SaaS providers, and Salesforce is one of them, where you can configure timeouts for those sessions. So, like, if someone steals a session token, it's only gonna last for so long, right? And this really helps you not just with this situation, but we have seen a lot of incidents happen recently where they install malware in an endpoint, and then they steal access tokens from the browser. So if you authenticate with a particular website, they will steal that access token and try to use it from different infrastructure. If you have those session timeouts configured properly to a few hours where they force you to re-authenticate, it's very likely you're going to mitigate that risk of someone stealing those session tokens and using them afterwards.
Right. And those timeouts are dependent essentially on the system that issues the token in the first place, or do they just kind of have some default if something's not configured?
It varies across providers, right? Some of them provide defaults that are useful. Others, the defaults are very bad or non-existent. But also, like they also need to balance how annoying they are compared to the security features. And I have very strict limits in our organization, and I always get people kind of like mad at me because it's like, why do I have to re-authenticate so often? I'm like, well, and then you explain why, and they're like, okay, it makes sense. But
Okay. I think recently Microsoft was talking about something connected to Entra ID and token binding. Does that term mean anything to you? Is there some connection between what we're talking about today and token binding?
That's more specifically for browsers, right? Where you can, once you authenticate, that token is you can bind it to the browser. You can also bind it. Okta, for instance, allows you to bind it to an IP address or to a network range, which is also helpful. It's not perfect, but it's also helpful in these situations. There is like new technologies that are new protocols that are coming up from Google and others in Google Chrome, where you can bind it to the browser, which is really cool because then you cannot use those tokens outside of the browser that authenticated. But that's not relevant to OAuth because it's a completely different beast in this sense.
Right. Okay. Got it. So how would an IT admin or somebody in security spot this kind of breach?
Yeah, I think, again, like Okta, I believe a lot of vendors probably detected this as part of their security program, where they have a security operating center that is receiving logs from their SaaS applications, and they were able to spot this token being used from suspicious infrastructure like Tor. Those are like default rules that are configured in many of these technologies. Again, if you were a company like Okta that is very sophisticated, you probably have those controls in place where people could not use those tokens outside of the IP ranges that they were supposed to. They get an alert. It's very likely that a vendor, that one of Drift vendors was the one that alerted Drift that this was happening, to be completely honest with you. And we have seen this happen very often, where one of your customers is the one that tells you there is something wrong going on here. But yeah, I think making sure you configure your Salesforce instance to send security log data to your security platform and configure Salesforce in a way that where you can put more controls into that authentication is really valuable. What we are finding is not a lot of people have done that. So there is a lot of work to do for organizations in this space. For
sure. Okay. So what are the top kind of 3 things or mistakes, if you like, that you see IT departments making with this kind of authentication setup?
I think the first one, which is the most basic one, which is like a large number of organizations we work with, they don't even have visibility into this, right? They can tell you, which SaaS providers they have, how they are integrating with each other, what integration exists, who is the owner, they don't have an approval process or a review process for those integrations. So it's a pretty big mess. So like the first thing is to start with that visibility and documenting owners and the reasons why you are enabling those integrations, right? And there's a lot of like shadow SaaS that we call, which is like your marketing department enabling that Salesforce integration, and the IT and security team has no idea that that's happening, right? I think the second one is that approval process, right? Like making sure that from now on, the default in a lot of these platforms, if you can configure, is try to disable those integrations unless an admin approves the integration, right? So if your marketing department is trying to create an integration between Salesforce and Drift, it has to go through an admin approval, right? And again, this only works with a small number of SaaS providers that have that functionality, but at the very least, try to do it with those that offer this functionality. For the others, you can have monitoring in place that tells you the integration it's happening, and then have an approval process where you can manually go through that. And if needed, disconnect that integration until it goes through the process. And then the third one is just lack of posture of security posture management at all, right? Which is, what are the settings in all these providers? Where are the recommended settings and values that I need to configure, and alerts around best practices and drift in terms of those settings being changed, right? So again, you're gonna have admins changing those settings, and there is a lot of moving pieces around who can configure those things. Many times you have employees managing those tools, and it's not IT the one that is actually taking care of those integrations. So pretty much those are the basics where I will start in terms of visibility, configuration, and approval processes, and risk management.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit about nudge security and how that fits into the SaaS story?
Yeah, definitely. So the reason why I created this company was actually pretty much this problem, right? We came from the security analytics space. I've been doing threat intelligence and threat detection my whole career. And, a lot of the breaches that we have seen were traditional endpoints, right? On-prem. But then we saw a lot of investment in cloud infrastructure, right? We saw the Wizzes and, companies addressing that space. But what we found that on the SaaS space, people were not doing enough, right? And we saw that this was going to become the next big thing where risk was going to be created, and the new kind of like attack vector that actors will be using. And it's starting to happen, right? We start to see that this new SaaS supply chain being very critical in a lot of the breaches that are happening today. So very basic, what we do is we can provide visibility into every SaaS vendor, your supply chain, third party, fourth parties, every integration that you have across providers, and give you the ability to govern that security program for SaaS in a very little time, right? Like we can do this in a few hours, giving you that inventory. And then the thing that we see over and over again is like security teams are overwhelmed by to-do list of, here there are like 2,000 things that you have to go do, and it's not very scalable, especially if you have a small budget and you don't have enough personnel, right? So the way we build the product is like very automated, but more importantly, the name Nudge comes from a core functionality of the product that allows you to automatically engage with your employees as they're making these decisions to make sure that they do the right thing. So think about, instead of like doing a security awareness training every year, you're doing a security awareness training every time you're making a decision that can introduce risk in your organization.
Okay. Could you explain a little bit about how Nudge identifies these SaaS applications? Because I think that's a really interesting thing about your product.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a few different data sources that we use. The core one, which is how we started the company, and we have a patent for that, is like we were thinking around, okay, if we have to find shadow SaaS, meaning SaaS that is being introduced by your employees and no one else is aware in the organization, what's the biggest signal? What are we missing here? So we came out with this idea of like using email as a proxy of discovery of those applications. Because think about every time you sign up for a new Asana account or a new Salesforce tenant or a new Snowflake integration, you start to get emails from those providers, and it's like, hey, welcome to Salesforce. Verify your email. Thank you for changing your password. So we are able to, do very targeted searches of those emails, and we don't access all the emails like a security gateway or secure email security solution. We use the APIs from Google and Microsoft to only look at the machine generated emails from those vendors. So that's kind of like the way where we start the discovery. The advantage with that is like we can do it really quickly, and we can give you that data extremely quickly, and you will be surprised how accurate that is in terms of like giving you the full inventory of those applications. Then we have integrations with your IDPs, so like Okta and Entra ID, so we can tell you, okay, of the 1,000 applications we have found, only 30 of them are behind SSO, right? Those are kind of like the managed applications. So you have a lot of work to do here. And then we have connected apps, right, which are API integrations with each of these platforms, these SaaS platforms, where we can go deeper and do things like that, posture management capabilities, right? Where we can tell you, hey, for these integrations, there's a misconfiguration, or usually enable session timeouts in Snowflake, or usual enforce IP ranges in Okta. So we can go very deep and give you guidance in terms of each of those applications. And then the latest one that we have added is a browser extension, right? Where we live in the browser. So it's really interesting. We can get telemetry, very detailed telemetry about how you authenticate with different services. What about, are you using passkeys? Are you using OAuth? Is it username and password? Is your password weak? Is your password being reused across different accounts? Is your password compromised? Where are you authenticating from? We are getting into more of the AI use cases where, we can monitor chatbot activity and stuff like that. But anyway, like more, being also closer to where work is done. Like nowadays, everything is happening in the browser, right? So being there is also very important from that nudge perspective, where we can, intervene when the employee is doing something. We can show up in the browser and give them guidance as they make decisions as well.
Oh, right. Okay. That's interesting. So if there was one thing you would advise somebody who's listening today who has never really thought about everything that you've talked about, whether they're just an IT admin or a security professional, if there was one thing you could tell them they should do right now, what would it be?
Yeah, it really depends on your organization and the maturity of your security program, right? But I will always say start with the basics, right? Which is make sure that, if you have SSO, try to, have SSO configured in as many applications as you can. Enforce MFA in every single managed and unmanaged application. And to be honest, like start there, because that's a lot of work. And I still haven't seen any organization that have full basic coverage of those basic pieces. Obviously, when we look at this particular problem, I think having that inventory of applications is a step number one, right? We always said you can protect what you can see. So start with that visibility and move towards, reducing risk around, maybe you don't need all those applications. Maybe those applications don't need this level of access. Maybe those applications are not even longer in use, but the access is still remains. So there's a lot of risk that gets is created because of this.
Great. Could you share maybe a customer success story, one of your clients that obviously you don't need to name any particular names, but where you've seen your service stop a breach, or stop something that could have been very scary, or could have created a major fallout for the company if they hadn't been using them.
So here we hear so many horror stories that it's interesting, but let me think about a few. Like a recurrent pattern we hear is ex-employees, right, where organizations don't do a really good job of boarding employees. And the reason for that is because of that shadow SaaS problem, right? Which is not all the applications are managed by IT. So when an employee leaves, they revoke access to a limited amount of applications. So we have had multiple customers where, they, after deploying our solution, they found really quickly that employees that have left years ago still had admin access to the keys of the kingdom, things like that. I think this particular breach with Drift was eye-opening for a lot of customers as well, where we were able to provide that visibility instantly of what of my vendors are using Drift and could be affected by this. Mitigate that risk really quickly, and also sending them breach notifications as all these vendors started to announce, publicly that they were breached by this actor. So that supply chain visibility is really important, and it's becoming really important from that like fourth party risk programs that we see. And then we are hearing so many horror stories around the AI use case as well, right? Which is, if we thought shadow SaaS was a huge problem, wait for until you hear about shadow AI, right? Which is, we feel like shadow AI is just like AI adoption is just making the shadow problem even bigger, right? Where like employers are kind of like, I want my employees to be very effective at what they do. Therefore, I'm going to relax some of those security controls and third-party risk management controls so they can move faster, right? And what we are seeing is this is starting to create a lot of risk, because a lot of those companies are very small companies that don't have security personnel in place, that sometimes been operating for months, and that where you're sending your most critical data about your business to like a random 3-person startup out there. So we see this as it's been an explosion for us in terms of new business that came from customers that have this problem.
Okay, so looking towards the future, obviously AI is still exploding with all that stuff going on there. But where do you see the landscape around detecting breaches and managing the SaaS supply chain in, I don't know, 2 years' time or 5 years' time?
Yeah, I think as you said, I think the world is gonna look very different too 5 years from now, right? I think finally, AI agents are starting to work, right? If you asked me 3 or 4 months ago, with the existing models, they were kind of junky. Like agents could not complete tasks very effectively because after a few steps, they will just like fail most of the time. But with the newer models, from OpenAI and others, we are seeing that the agents are finally working for many tasks, and this is just going to get better and better, right? So I think 2 years from now, we're going to live in a world where agents are going to be doing a lot of the things that we do today, and that's going to create a lot of risk in terms of some of the things that we have discussed today, right? And there are like few reasons for that. The first one is those agents need access to your data, and that access in many cases is it's being done through the same protocols that we discussed today. Sometimes that's an OAuth grant. Sometimes it's a API key. Sometimes it's some of the new protocols like MCP and agent to agent. But those credentials are going to be there, and these agents are going to be accessing a lot of data and credentials from your environment. So the other point is, like as we discussed, shadow AI is the main way AI is making itself to organizations, right? Like we see employees adopting those tools, and actually the copilots and the things that the higher ups are pushing out, those projects are failing, right? What is succeeding is individuals finding their use cases and bringing tools in the environment that are helping, are working for them.
Mm-hmm.
So again,
Mm-hmm.
we believe, and we are starting to see that that's creating a lot of sprawl and a lot of shadow, SaaS and shadow AI across our customer environments.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting what you said. Quite often the bigger projects that are initiated by IT or the business fail, but the smaller projects that are initiated by employees themselves often just kind of go on in the background without anybody noticing what's going on.
I'm sure people
So,
are tired of
yeah.
like hearing the same data over and over again. But that MIT report that came out a few weeks ago that said, hey, 90% of the Copilot projects in enterprises are failing. And I don't think it's as high as that probably, but it's pretty high, right? But at the same time, they're seeing that the adoption velocity of chatbots and other AI tools in corporate environments is skyrocketing, and at the same time, right? So that proves the point that individuals and business units and smaller groups of people are the ones that are bringing these tools and creating value in those organizations.
Yeah. And, I'm part of the problem because I'm the only person, as far as I know, in my company to have created a Copilot agent, at least one that's been published. So hi IT, it's me, in case you didn't notice. So how does licensing work for Nudge?
Yeah, we basically look at how many licenses you pay Microsoft or Google, depending on who your provider is for your email, and then we charge you for that. So it's very easy, transparent pricing in that sense.
Okay, got it. So all of this stuff that Nudge does happen, with the exception of the browser extension, I guess, happens in the cloud.
Yeah.
If I
Yeah,
understood.
so the browser extension is the only thing where you deploy, that obviously that the extension in your different browsers, but everything else is happening through APIs in the cloud. Yeah.
Right. Okay, great. So what's the best way to find out more about
Yeah,
Nudge?
so that's techcurity.com. We are very transparent about what we do, and we have a free trial. So you don't even have to talk to us if you don't want. You can just test the product. We believe that, seeing is really believing. So like if anyone is interested, there are different ways you can start that trial and just see the value by yourself. And then if it's a good fit, please do reach out. But have fun with it. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I would encourage everybody to go and have a look at Nudge, just because the way that it works is really interesting, discovering all of those shadow SaaS apps through email. I don't know if that's a unique approach, but I haven't seen that in any other products. I think that's really interesting, just to go and have a look at how that all works. So do check that out. I'd like to thank you, Jaime, for sharing information about this breach and how it affects the supply chain. Of course, it's really eye-opening, and I'm sure it will be for a lot of our viewers.
Thank you.
Okay. That's it for today, and do check out Nudge Security, and we will see you next time.